Hi there. I am completely honored today to have with me a very special guest and a great friend and an amazing writer and kind of voluble, interesting, always on target human being by the name of Susan Patton. People may know her as the Princeton mom, and she has a book of one type, but with under two different names. I think the original was Mary Smart, and we'll go over the rebranding and so forth and why. Um, and Susan, tell us everything. Start wherever you like, and Susan is just one of those people that is always captivating. So I'm ready. I don't really have any prepared questions other than uh, what's up.
That's so nice. That's so flattering. And I say the same about you, Duck. I say the same about you. You know everything. Always interesting talking to you. Um, but the book and the rebrand of the book, the reason it came about was it seemed very clear to me that for all of the talking everybody was doing to young women about leaning in, this is the time of Sheryl Sandberg leaning in and planning for career and how to sort of shuffle off your kids to anybody but you so that you could just spend more time working and more time working. I thought, there's nobody talking to young women, smart young women, about how to plan for their personal happiness.
Mhm.
And I think that it is just so critically important that women who want marriage and motherhood, and I understand that's not everybody, but
Mhm.
women who want marriage and motherhood, you have to plan for that personal happiness with at least the same commitment and dedication that they plan for their professional success. And when you say that to women, they look at you like, huh? What? What? Why are you confused by that? Well, love just happens. Honey, let me tell you, it doesn't just happen. In no way does it just happen. In the same way that your career doesn't just happen.
Mhm.
It has to be planned. You have to give serious thought to how to put yourself in the right place at the right time to take best advantage of your opportunities. And I was specifically talking to the young women at Princeton, my alma mater. Did I mention that both of my boys graduated from Princeton? I don't like for a conversation to, come and go without my getting that in. Um, it was specifically written to the young women at Princeton who are so still 10 years later, terrified of saying that they actually want to get married and have children. It's like heresy to say such a thing. And I just felt it was a critically important message to get to these young women, these smart young women, because they have a unique problem. Smart women are going to have problems finding men as smart as they are or smarter than they are when they start looking for partners outside of an academic environment. I mean, yes, you could occasionally find a smart guy, I suppose, somewhere, but I was trying to explain to these young women, you will never have a greater concentration of smart men, worthy men to choose from than you do here on campus while you're an undergraduate. And I tried to explain to them, you'll be dumbstruck by how smart the guys outside of college are not.
Well, the interesting use of the word dumbstruck there, because almost literal.
Almost literal, almost literal. But I talk to women all the time. Still, 10 years later, I still hear from women who say to me, man, that is so true. That is so true. I haven't had an intelligent conversation with a date since I was in college. And I could believe that. I could absolutely believe that. So I thought the important message was to let these young women, particularly smart young women, if you're not a exceptionally well-educated woman, it's a little easier for you because if you go from the premise of a woman wants to marry a man who's at least as smart as she is, if you're not really, a super academic wonderkind, the pool of men that would be acceptable to you is much larger. If you're one of these brainiac women from Princeton or Harvard or Yale or, where did you go? Never mind, I know where you went. Uh, Yale's a good school too, Randy. Everybody doesn't get into Princeton. I say it to you all the time.
Yeah.
It's hard for these women at these most elite institutions to find men who are as smart as they are. And men that they're dating once they're out of school are intimidated by them because they know these women are so smart.
Mhm.
It's a,
You bring up a lot of excellent points there. We are, antediluvian. I'm sure there've been some floods since you and I went to college. We graduated the same year,
we did.
and back in those days, Yale I think was like 20% female, and I
As
think
was
it's
Princeton.
almost your book pertains. If we could bring it back to those days, it's even a better book for that time because there were basically a shortage of women. So as a guy, and I was even a guy back then, we poured over. We had our old campus was called like the Facebook of the day, and the pages that got thumbed over were the girl page. There are photos on every page, but we pretty much knew the entire roster, and I don't think it was the same for the women because they didn't have to. They were more scrutinized and pursued, and so but there was kind of a different aspect, and I think anyway there was a dynamic there where it could have been to the girls' advantage because they were at a numerical guys whatever they had their opportunities. So but today I think it's a little bit trickier because the ratios, I think there are even more women on campus than men, but still I think your point pertains because back then where there were interactions and they could be just spontaneous spur of the moment kind of things, and you'd
Right.
meet odd moments at a library or just walking back crisscrossing the campus. You've seen somebody three times in a row, that kind
Exactly.
of stuff, and you
Dining
don't
hall
have
or in
that
the
kind of
library.
you're basically in a fishbowl. It's a pretty big fishbowl, but you're in the same fishbowl. Let's say it's like the aquarium, maybe big enough fishbowl that you're not going to be bumping into the same fish every 2 seconds, but over the course of time you will, and you have this familiarity. You get to see people's behavior and whatnot, and there were just a lot more kind of interaction abilities, like and as opposed to formal dating,
Right.
which I think has its own constraints. So people are on edge and they're trying to present a certain way, and for better or for worse, men and women or boys and girls, whatever they happen to be at that moment, can see each other both in the sweatpants and hoodie kind of formality, as well as at dances and I don't know, events and whatever. So it's kind of like you get to see people in a much more naturalistic way.
Exactly.
So that's not really a question there, but maybe you can comment on the differences between then and now, and what are the opportunities, and what's been kind of the resonance of the book. And I assume you have your followers, but maybe sub rosa.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think I have an enormous following of women and parents of young women who so want to say all of these things to their daughters but can't. I don't have daughters, you don't have daughters, but you don't have daughters, do you?
I do not.
Right. There are parents of daughters who want them to hear this message, but they feel they can't be the one to say it. There are differences from when we were on campus to what's going on campus now in terms of the interaction between young men and young women and the mating and dating and what leads to marriage and what doesn't. One of the starkest differences and most troubling and, in my opinion, awful differences is that women are freely having sex with men from whom they have no commitment of marriage. Well, if you eliminate the incentive to commit, why is a man going to commit?
Yeah.
Back in the day, I guess it was before, maybe even before birth control, young people got married right out of college. Once they were done with school, they got married, mostly because they want to have sex. And you didn't have sex out of marriage because the consequences were dire. Well, I think...
I hate the word dire. I would say consequential.
Okay, you could say consequential because
neither you and I are dire. I mean, we exist. I mean, all the humans we all came from some type of sexual union, I presume, and they're consequential. I mean, they may be desirable and
they may be desirable, but I think for some people, dire. I mean, if you don't want to have a baby and you get pregnant, it's dire. It's
fair enough.
It's really, really, really bad. But from the perspective of mating and dating, if a young woman is looking to attract a young man for the purpose of long-term relationship leading to marriage, sex is one of the most important elements that will attract a man. And if a woman offers it up without any commitment, then you've effectively eliminated the incentive to commit.
Yeah, I know. The current day feminism basically has us all, as players on the soccer field, and it's kind of positionless basketball, and everyone passing the ball from one to another doesn't really matter, and could be, and again, it doesn't even have to be, heterosexual, whatever. It's like anybody linking up and hooking up and da 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 da. This whole concept of hooking up, which I guess went from knitting to.
Well, I still knit, but okay, yeah.
What is it?
I still knit. I'm an
avid knitter. I might have the terminology wrong. You're the expert.
No, hooking up is absolutely the term, and it's astounding to me that even smart women are looking at hooking up as currency. Like if they're a woman who's willing to hook up with a man, she thinks that somehow makes her more desirable. It doesn't.
Right.
If you're playing a long game, I mean, if you want to be the most popular girl at the party, then yeah, I guess you could do that. Yeah. But is what you want to be the most popular girl at the party, or do you want something more long-term and meaningful and life dream fulfilling?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Getting back to my kind of sports analogies, which I can never get too far away from. I apologize, but these days there's a thing almost called positionless basketball. Guys have different heights, and there are positions still, but the idea is that it's supposed to be a fluidity, and if you can defend any position, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's ice hockey, or field hockey, or any kind of hockey, where there's a definite vector. There are people who are trying to score, and there's one person, the goalie, who's trying to prevent a score. And I think sexual dynamics have a lot more to do with hockey than positionless basketball, because I think that nobody respects a goalie who lets in every goal. The forward, who shows some skill in scoring, and again, the terminology kind of goes. I mean, guys score and they give high fives. Right. Wow, you scored! You got one past the goalie, and that's also another kind of sexual expression. So but if you slip one past the goalie, that means that you had skill. So if you have your game, there's a comedian I recommend you're listening to. His name is Mark Normand, like in Normandy without the Y. And he has he's kind of sarcastic. He's a comedian, so he's a little bit rough and raw, but he makes an excellent point that guys bring their A game to get one past the goalie. So they have to be, really slick wings, or centers or whatever the positions are, to get one past the goalie. They got to work really hard all game, all night long. And the woman has that yes and no ability. The same kind of analogy is if two people walk into a bar at 2 a.m., closing time, whatever, maybe not in New York, 1:30 a.m., and say, the guy yawns like, I could really use some company for tonight. Any girls available? He'd get laughed at. The girl walks into the bar 1:30 a.m., like yawns, like, I could use some company tonight. Everybody in the bar, every guy empties out. Right. And so she has the right of, she may not be practicing goalie, but she has the right of the goalie to let in or not let in. And the guys are only wanting to score, and the women have discretion. And so far as they don't use that discretion, it is not ultimately an attractive proposition for the guy, beauty or not. And so there's kind of like the guys, guys, girls for, certain occasions, and the guys, girls whom they want to bring home to mom.
Well, and that's it. And those are two different women, dramatically different women. I understand the mentality of the party girl. She loves being the center of attention. She loves that all the guys are eager to, get with her. But that's not the girl that he's bringing home to meet mom. Mom doesn't want to meet a girl who has, is easier to make than a peanut butter sandwich. That's not the girl that mom wants to meet. That's not what every mom hopes her son brings home. But it's a very hard sell. I've spoken on college campuses. I spoke at Princeton. I spoke at UPenn several times. I've spoken at several colleges. And there's always, sort of one little girl in the back when the question answers, one little girl in the back who, will say, sort of an unattractive girl usually in the back who will say to me, but how do we compete with these women? How do we compete? If we maintain an element of virtuousness, how do we compete with women who are just having sex with these guys randomly? They're popular, we're not. The answer is you can't. You can't compete with them because there is nothing that trumps free sex. Free sex is better than anything. No man is going to walk away from free sex, but you have to play the long game. You have to consider what the long-term goals are going to be. And it's hard. It's hard to temporarily, and in many cases, it's, months or years, to be sort of the girl that, the guys don't really pay too much attention to because they know they're getting nowhere with her.
This is a tough sell, I have to say. So there's kind of like a middle ground. I'm remembering from my college days where, girls who would, I assume put out, as it were, but putting out with the steady boyfriend. What are your thoughts on kind of that middle ground? Having the boyfriend, hitting, going around all the bases, but it's just that one person. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of like proto-marriage, pseudo-marriage, or I don't know what. You tell me.
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like the idea of living together before marriage. Either you're in or you're out. I mean, honestly, you have to make a decision. Either get married or don't get married. I think the idea of living together is creating sort of a false existence. If you're not married, you can get out of it easily, which means you don't really have to try very hard. You don't really have to make so many sacrifices because, whatever. I think that's a mistake. If what you want is a long-term relationship, marriage and motherhood, if that's really what you want, then no, I don't think you should be. Don't be living with him, and don't be. Even though it's one partner, unless there's a commitment. If there's a commitment of marriage, then I suppose that you could engage in. You could have sex if there's a commitment of marriage, and you believe that he's not going to back out once he's been there.
Once he can.
Yeah.
So you and I had spoken about Herman Wouk, and one of my favorite books, rather surprising.
Marjorie Morningstar.
Yeah, and
great book. Yeah.
And I when I read that book, I kind of understood my mother, and I think I probably mentioned this to you, but I understood her in a different way because she grew up in that era where she, had dating. It's not like she was unhappy. She was very popular and sprightly, and she knew how to dress and she knew how to make clothes. She literally knew how to draw and make her own clothing. And she was, kind of arty, whatever. And apparently she was a hot ticket. But, from all reports from contemporaries and whatnot, there was a lot of dating that went on. So the people would come over and they'd come to her, they had a small little, like a duplex kind of whatever. I mean, their apartments, whatever. But people come over and the guys would come over and there would be parties. But people, kind of like decided on a dating basis, and they didn't get around the bases, as it were. And I'm not sure which base, and I don't want to think about my mom in that context, but, it was much more that you had the opportunity to kind of riffle through the deck a little bit without the emotional commitments. I think that, people have this mistaken concept that having sex with a lot of people is somehow going to help you understand all the cards in the deck.
Yeah.
I don't really think that's the case. I think you can look at the cards in the deck. It's kind of like going through a museum, or better analogy is well, I'll leave out my analogies, but I think that in the Marjorie Morningstar context, which I think is like the mid 1930s and a little bit later, that people dated and they had conversations, they went out, and they did a lot of things, they went dancing and so forth. They might go to rides, they maybe go to promontories, might have some necking and whatnot. But they understood that if they went all the way, there was going to be an emotional commitment, and that would kind of cripple, in a sense, their ability to look at other people in the meanwhile, whether that guy was the right guy or not. That's the one you settle for, and that's the one you're going to be hanging around with for a good length of time. And then the other guys are not going to do that with you because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true.
Can we go back to the 1930s now?
A couple things have made that almost impossible. The birth control pill has made between birth control and abortion, sex has become something that is almost inconsequential. Think about it. In the back to the 30s, before there was birth control pills and before abortion was readily available, there were serious consequences to having sex. Again, I'm saying dire consequences because I think there were dire consequences for many women and for many young men too, I would imagine. And that couldn't have been a good conversation when the girlfriend says to you, Howard, I have something to tell you. I'm late. That couldn't have been a good conversation for guys either. And I've known men over the years, men who are, a million years ago, who told me about how they wound up getting engaged to their wives because she got pregnant when they didn't plan on getting pregnant. And in some cases, the marriages worked out fine. And in some cases, they didn't. But I think that birth control and abortion has rendered sex almost meaningless. Almost meaningless. If you could avoid pregnancy beforehand or take care of pregnancy afterwards, it's like, what are we even talking about here? What are the consequences of having sex? Meanwhile, the truth is, for women, there are enormous consequences emotionally, mentally. I think sex does something to women's minds and bodies that it doesn't. I often laugh about this with men who just became new fathers, and I say to them, well, congratulations on your 22nd sperm contribution. Wasn't that wonderful of you? Don't think for a minute that any part of this is equal. There's no equality here. Your wife has had 9 months of her whole body being ravaged, but I'm sure your 22nd sperm contribution was just a wonderful thing. And how good of you to provide that. It's different. It is just different. And to deny that sex is different for women than it is for men it's just foolhardy. Of course it's different. It's wildly different.
Yeah, I think even absent the birth possibility, I think it is different. I think that's kind of the Super Bowl for women. I think men are external. Men not just physically, not just body parts, but the way men categorize. Men are, I've heard hugely in-depth conversations between guys about the stringing on their tennis rackets. I'm not like 40 minutes. And similarly, like the engines in certain cars, difference between car models, who's the better baseball player, which stats matter. Like guys are very externally interested. So they categorize, they're interested in the phylogeny of the whole world. And women, most of our dinner parties wind up separating over, first hour, whatever after that, and maybe after dinner into, separate cliques. And the women are talking about relationships. They're talking about who did what and how that affects this relationship, whether this friendship, and their scorecard. They're not interested in the player, in the minutia. They're interested in how people acted and who's on the scale, who's on the ins and the outs, and so forth. And I just think it's a different aspect. So the relationship part, again, men score and they're interested in that aspect. They've kind of categorized that person.
Oh yeah.
And the women are looking for the validation. And getting to the Super Bowl part, guys are intently interested in the Super Bowl. Women that I know, they're far more interested in say, The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. Insofar it's a game, it's one. Let's say they're both games, but one has a far different scoring pattern. The Super Bowl, it's easy to tell who won.
Men and women play the game very differently, and I think the women's movement, although I guess it was intended well, it was intended to do good, and in some cases it did. It's done more harm for women than it has done good. And I say that as a beneficiary of the good works of the women's movement. I wouldn't have been at Princeton had it not been for the women's movement. But look at all the misinformation, disinformation, all the stupid ideas it's put into the heads of women. Have sex the way men do. Go right ahead. No, don't. That's a mistake. For you to do that, you will pollute yourself. You'll pollute your head, your body. You can't have sex the way men do.
Yeah.
When the women's movement tells young women, you could take all the time you want to get married and have children. No, you certainly cannot. You certainly cannot take all the time you want. The lapse of time between your early 20s and your early 30s, it will go so quickly, it will make your head spin. And the difference is like night and day. women hate to hear me say this, but if you turn 30 and you have not found him, if you have not met him, your prospects are pretty grim. It's like women turn 30 and they fall off a cliff. It's just the truth. It is the truth. I'm telling young women who are in college, headed to college or just out of college, now is when the iron is hot. You strike while the iron is hot, which is now. And when they say to me, well, I'm going to take the first 10 years out of college to develop my career, and then I'll think about finding a husband. Yeah. And I say to them, so what you're saying is, now you're 22, you're going to wait until you're in your early 30s and then look for a man who's how old? 33, 34? And he is, of course, looking for a woman 10 years younger than you. Because why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? A 34-year-old man doesn't want a 35-year-old, a 34-year-old woman. He wants a woman 10 years younger because of all the obvious reasons. A 24-year-old woman can't compete with a 34-year-old woman on any level. On any level. A 24-year-old woman, they're dewy, they're innocent, they're wonderful, and they have 10 more years of fertility in front of them.
There's also the aspect of challenge. Men compete. I can't necessarily speak to the world this instant, but they compete in the workplace and so forth. They don't necessarily want to compete at home, and it depends on who that smart woman is. But a lot of times, men are looking for beauty and comfort, and they're looking for peace. They're looking for, a place to grow something, and they don't necessarily want somebody who's only got a part-time commitment towards that. Let's call it an analogy of a garden, of growing the family garden. And somebody who wants, some gardener to come in and watch over the plants and landscape or whatnot in a metaphorical sense. And while she does, equal the work, I think guys actually have an issue on some level. Maybe they might enunciate it, but with women who make more than they do, and women who are more successful.
Of course they do.
And I think it's hard for them. I think it's an ego thing. They have a hard time with guys who make more than they do. I mean, they don't have to marry them, but it's like, I think that is I can't do a full statistical analysis, but a lot of, we know marriages that are broken up, but sometimes, it's because there's not the same commitment at home, and men, are never going to be able to do the same kind of domestic caring. They don't even have that baby voice that women have, two babies, to the same, maybe they do some of them, it's not the same extent. They don't have that same caring thing. And, we've just kind of like, no pun intended, thrown the baby out with the bathwater as far as some of the, theories and ideas go. And it's old fashioned, but, it was old fashioned because there was a fashion to doing it. There's a reason.
Yeah. And it's troubling to think that the women's movement and the progressive left has tried to put the idea in the minds of young women that domestic tranquility, domestic bliss is a fallacy. It's something undesirable. Why would you want to be a wife and mother? When I was at Princeton, and we used to, among my women friends, we would talk about what we want to be when we graduated or when we grew up. And they all wanted to be very important people. And many of them went on to be very, very important people. And I would say, oh, I want to get married and have kids. And they would look at me like I was, are you crazy? Are you insane? You're going to throw away a Princeton education on being a wife and mother? Well, see, here's right there is the fallacy. It's not firstly, you're not throwing away anything. Two, being the wife and mother is the prize. That's it. There's no greater experience for a woman. If she's good at it, if she does it well, if she builds a home, creates a life for a family, if she raises good children, there's nothing more rewarding. And I know many women that I graduated with, brilliant women who have, a couple of them have run for president. Who some of my classmates are rather. And these are amazingly accomplished, unbelievably wealthy women. Yet if you ask them what's the best thing in their lives, what are they most proud of, they'll tell you it's their kids. Of course
Yeah.
it's their kids.
I know. It's like nobody on our deathbed is ever going to say,
I wish I worked harder. Yeah, that's it, Doc. I wish I worked harder. Yeah, nobody wishes they worked harder.
this concept that women are just kind of smoother, curvier men.
Right. They're really not. They're really, really not. And they need something different than what men need. And we've been brainwashed. Young women have been brainwashed into thinking, nope, you got to lean in. You got to just, try harder to be a man. Terrible.
Well,
and how many women?
So even back in our day, I think the cohort of women from my class, I don't know the number exactly, but I think the median, I mean, I don't know, we can do different averages, but well, I think the average number of children is something like 1.2 amongst the women in my class. And I think it's higher amongst the men because the men didn't only, I mean, numerically it was impossible, but the men didn't only marry those women. So they married women who wanted to have kids. And so the number of offspring per human is higher amongst the men than the women. And I think the number has only gone down. I think if I'm not mistaken, it's right now around 0.8 expected children for contemporaries over the last 10 years or whatever of college women graduates from the upper level, say Ivy Leagues and whatnot. And, if you ever seen 0.8 of a child, it's not pretty. I'm just kidding.
Not a good image, very short child, right?
Yeah. but okay, I guess. And, you pay your money, you buy your ticket, you take whichever ride you want. But I think, women have, Andrew Clavin is one of my idols, and I am interested in his theorizing. But his problem with feminism is that it lacks femininity, and that the women are modeling themselves on being a guy, and they think somehow they can be a better guy. And maybe they're smarts. I personally think that smarts are different between men and women, and you mentioned that partly in the book. I think, as I mentioned before, men tend to be more technical, they're more interested in detail, and the next great software program or whatever is probably going to be a guy thing. And some, quasi-autistic guy like Elon, who's going to really dive in and doesn't, can spend morning, noon, and night at a place, sleeping in the corner on a schmata, whatever, with a little, makeshift pillow made out of his laundry.
So appealing.
Yeah, a guy will do that. A guy can dive in totally and not come up and so forth. And he points out that all the next best things are always going to be from men, because men kind of have this bigger splay on the characteristics of behavior. Women, are just as, on average, just as intelligent and so forth, but their dynamics have a narrower bandwidth of kind of women behavior. Anyway, what's the point there? So what's happened over time is that women have kind of like made this kind of feminist, I guess, bond or pact, but I think they've been left short because now they're so accommodating towards the theory and towards the theory that now the feminism is allowing trans feminism to come into there's like they're not going to get necessarily be able to categorize what's woman. And I think it's a big loss. It was just like in women's sports, they don't have their own field anymore. They're just in women's locker rooms, even worse. They don't have their own place. It's just, I think it's an inversion and it's almost a literal denuding of the concept.
Right. Well, so many aspects of traditional femininity have just been panned. They've been dismissed. They've been talked about as unimportant and insignificant. And for many women, I'm certainly among them, of the things that I love most in my life are the things that I love baking. I love cooking. I love presenting a beautiful table. I love cooking for my family. I love sewing. I love things that I love creating things for my family, for my children. I love using my hands to build things, to make things. And it's, these are delicate arts that have all but vanished. And that's a shame, because I think women genuinely love doing these things, and they used to be judged on them. Can she bake a cherry pie? What does that mean? Can she bake a cherry pie? Billy boy. It was a measure of a woman, whether she knew how to bake a cherry. It's not an easy thing to bake a cherry pie. It requires craft and art and care and experience. And it's a shame that more women don't do it because they think, who should be, why should anybody be bothered baking? Well, it's not a question of being bothered. It's a good thing. It's like having children. I wrote a piece a while back about modern Mother's Day, which entails you get a sperm donor, then you get a surrogate to gestate then you get a full-time nanny to raise the child. Then there's like no part of this that you're owning anymore. It's just no part of it that you're owning anymore. And that's absurd. You're taking away some of the things of womanhood that are so special and so wonderful.
Well, I just don't think I don't think it necessarily makes the kids better. People are always thinking about themselves and these different kind of relationships and who. I mean, Catholic Charities literally was cut out of the adoption services in Massachusetts. They weren't allowed to be given any of the kids up for adoption because they didn't buy into the concept of, promoting what's now called
gender
gay marriage. And so they don't have any. They went from a pretty authoritative role. I worked as a physician, and my primary care, there were kids going in and out of foster care and they hoped for adoption. Catholic Charities was a big part. I had staff who would work there, and they were just cut out completely. We've kind of put all the chips on one side of the table, and this can theoretically, happen in a society, but it doesn't necessarily work over the long term. The demographics are such that other more traditional societies will take over. If not because of the value of their theories and the value of their enlightenment, the value of their numbers, because certain societies, and I'm not recommending we, move back to the 6th or 7th or 8th century for social mores, but I think that, this abdication of inheritance and this abdication of bringing your culture through your children and having the unit be the family, not some federal agency is a misnomer.
Right.
I'm going to kind of blather on 1 second more, which is that, I went to medical school, which might be a shock because I have MD after my name here. But on average, the women, went to the more less kind of numerically interesting, the less financially remunerative branches, and they went more towards the caring aspect. They went more into pediatrics. They went more into, social type of medical things, family practice, and whatnot, than the guys did. I mean, some guys did and some guys, whatever. There's some overlap. But, generally speaking, the women are more interested in the caring aspects and the men more technical. But kind of, it's a reiteration. I think Tess is interested in the caring aspect there.
Yeah, well, I can imagine that that's true because women are naturally, that feeds into their natural inclinations of nurturing and caring. I guess women can be orthopedic surgeons, but I mean, to be a bone crusher, you need like a big ugly guy, no?
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't go to med school, but I'm just making that assumption.
No, I understand that. So the question would be, in part, are women sublimating some of these nurturing aspects towards that social work kind of job or teaching, whatever? And I guess since we round out our kind of 3/4 hour, what are the advice elements do you give towards young women today, outside of college, for instance?
Well, outside of college, if their interest is, again, not every woman wants to be married and have children, but if that's really what you want, you have to put yourself in places and circumstances that allow you to meet appropriate people. Some of those circumstances, if you missed your opportunity while you were at school, get involved with your school alumni association. Most schools have vibrant alumni associations that have events and parties and, mixers and, some have even elaborate vacation things that they do to get involved. These are pre-qualified people that you at least have one very big thing in common with. I tell young women, go to synagogue or go to church or go to mosque, go to whatever your house of worship is, but go regularly. Be a part of that community. Get to know the cleric. Tell the cleric that you would appreciate being introduced to other single members of the congregation. I think, any rabbi, any priest would be delighted to connect single members of a congregation. And again, this is a safe kind of thing. This is not like going to a singles bar or, some pickup place. That's not what it is. It's respectable. It's safe. And again, you have at least one big thing in common, whatever your religion is. And even if you're not a religious person, get a little religion. That's not such a bad thing.
Yeah.
Get a little, it's a good thing. I tell young women, take a course. I don't mean like a lecture course where you sit in the back of a dorm. I don't mean that. But an active kind of, the Y here in New York certainly has a million of these. Take a course in pottery or cooking or woodworking or jewelry making, something that meets every Saturday or Sunday from 3 to 5 or 3 to 6. And, they have a break in between. Everybody gets to walk around and, you try my tomato sauce. I try your tomato sauce, during the break. And then we go back to, whatever. But it's a regular meeting of people who share some common interest with you, whether it's, Italian cooking or sourdough bread baking or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the other thing I tell young women is to let everybody that they know and trust know that you're seriously interested in meeting a young man who would be appropriate for you, who might be interested someday in marriage and family. And I tell these women, be clear in letting your friends, only your real friends, and be careful who you say this to, but friends that you can trust, be clear in telling them you really want them to do this, because people are reluctant to make these introductions for fear of seeming meddling or intrusive. You have to let people know, I really would appreciate it. And, I tell them, be a little more proactive. Say to them, think for a minute. Who do you know? Just think for a minute. Who do you know that you could introduce me to that maybe would be good for me? Make it very clear you really want them to do this. You wouldn't find it an intrusion or an imposition. You want them to do this.
Yeah. I think in the Christian world, there's, a little bit more of this kind of concept of, it's kind of segueing backwards to some of the things you're talking about, not being, kind of totally active sexually and holding back and finding some common ground through a church, through a belief, and through faith. I think it happens in Orthodox Judaism and then to varying extents, elsewhere. But I think it's a tough kind of field. I have young nieces, and there's a desire for everything you're talking about, but it's a hard play. Because for their contemporaries, the guys are not necessarily interested in that. They need to find somebody a little bit older, a little bit more established. And some of the attraction for men is wealth and solidity, stability, and so forth. And I think it's an interesting and difficult landscape for them. I'm not envious. I would not want to be that. So closing words for us. I want to be able to present your book for people first of all, and I'll do that now, I think. But tell us, how they can find you, how they can maybe hire you as their matchmaker.
Well, the book is available, on Amazon or on Alibris or on Biblio or at the Strand or wherever you buy books, you can find it. It goes by the name Marry Smart. That was the hardcover version. And this version, Marry by Choice, Not by Chance, is the softcover version, which has a little bit of extra material in it. I understand that, the extreme progressives just hate the whole notion of encouraging young women to think about marriage and motherhood. But how many women really do think about marriage and motherhood, really want those things, and don't know how to even begin to find them? And there are limitations on a woman's ability to attract the kind of man that she wants. There are biological restrictions. We tapped on it a little bit ago about If you wait until you're in your mid-30s, you're already into advanced maternal age situations, which, a man that's been playing the field for 10 years and is now 34, 33, whatever, and is ready to settle down and get married, he wants a 22-year-old woman who has 10 more years of fertility on her than you do.
Correct.
You got to think about this a lot earlier. Women have to think about this a lot earlier. The other thing, and this is something I've given sort of thought to more recently, is that if you miss your opportunity when you're in college to find him, once you get out of college as a 22-year-old, don't be dating 22-year-old, 24-year-old men. They clearly do not want marriage and motherhood at this point in their lives. With all that free sex out there, why would they?
Right.
Forget these men.
Yeah, no, my mother back in those days, she looked for a guy who was older. She married somebody 7 years older,
Yep.
and he was more stable. He was an attorney, whatnot. And getting back to the Marjorie Morningstar thing, she had, kind of a library. She knew who these guys were. I think in some ways more deeply than women do today.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily get the learning curve to understand all his theories, what his wishes are, what his desires are, meet his family, all kind of stuff. Everyone's kind of got things a little bit bass backwards. Anyway, thank you so much, Susan, for being on my show.
What a pleasure talking to you in any format, Randy. Love talking to you always.
Well, thank you. I'm going to leave with one quick self-promotion. If people want to help support the podcast here, they can buy my book, Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. I'm not going to really chat about it now. It's not about dating.
No, it's
not. One slightly interesting point, I suppose, would be dating is that the mosquitoes are all women, the dangerous ones. But frankly, it's a dating phenomenon that mosquitoes have, because the men only live briefly. They live like a few weeks, and they're pretty much there to pass their half of the genome on. And the women are just vastly hungry as they nurture the eggs. And so they have to go around and suck blood. So they've kind of eliminated the middleman, where the guys are eating and taking up some of the blood out there. So kind of leaving it only to the women. So it's a pretty burdensome thing, I guess, to be a women insect, but there you have it. Or a mosquito per se. Anyway, lovely to chat with you. I look forward to seeing you again. Hopefully.